The windshield wipers fought against the October rain as Sarah Chun gripped the steering wheel tighter. Her hands were still shaking from the fight with Marcus. The bruise on her left cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, a fresh reminder of what her marriage had become. She had finally done it, finally packed her bags and walked out. The divorce papers were folded in her purse, waiting for the right moment to be served. The highway stretched ahead like a black ribbon through the Pennsylvania countryside. Sarah had chosen this route deliberately, avoiding the main roads where Marcus might look for her. She was heading to her sister Jenny's house in upstate New York, the one place she felt safe. Jenny had been begging her to leave Marcus for 2 years now, ever since the first time Sarah had shown up with mysterious bruises and weak explanations. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest on both sides of the narrow road. Sarah checked her rearview mirror for the 100th time. Empty. Marcus was probably still at home, drinking himself into a rage, not even realizing she was gone yet. By morning, when he sobered up enough to notice, she would be 300 miles away, protected by her sister and brother-in-law who had made it clear that Marcus would not be welcome. The rain was getting worse. Sarah leaned forward, squinting through the windshield as the wipers struggled to keep up. She should pull over, wait for the storm to pass, but she was so close to freedom now. Just another hour and she would be at Jenny's doorstep, finally, able to breathe again. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. For a moment, panic shot through her chest. What if it was Marcus? What if he had discovered she was gone? She glanced down quickly, relief washing over her when she saw Jenny's name on the screen. "Where are you?" "I have hot chocolate waiting," the text read. Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. Jenny always knew exactly what she needed. Hot chocolate. And a safe place to cry, to plan, to figure out what came next. She reached for the phone to type a quick response. That was when she saw the deer. It stood in the middle of the road like a statue, its eyes reflecting her headlights. Sarah yanked the wheel hard to the left, her tires losing grip on the wet asphalt. The car spun once, twice, then launched off the road and down a steep embankment. The last thing she remembered was the sickening sound of metal crushing against an oak tree. When consciousness returned, everything hurt. Sarah's head felt like it was splitting in two, and something warm and sticky was running down her forehead. Blood. The car was tilted at a strange angle, the driver's side door crumpled inward. Her left arm was trapped beneath twisted metal, sending shooting pains up to her shoulder. She tried to move, to assess the damage, but even the smallest motion sent waves of agony through her body. The rain was still coming down, finding its way through the shattered windshield and soaking her clothes. Her phone was somewhere on the floor, probably broken. The chances of anyone finding her on this remote stretch of road were slim. Hours passed. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, dreams mixing with reality until she could not tell which was which. Sometimes she thought she heard voices, rescue workers maybe, but when she tried to call out, no sound came from her throat. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her drowsy. She knew that was dangerous, knew she had to stay awake, but it was so hard. Dawn was breaking when she heard the sound of engines. Real engines, not dream ones. Sarah forced her eyes open and saw flashing lights through the trees. Emergency vehicles. Someone had found her. She tried to call out again, but her voice was just a whisper. "Over here," a voice shouted. "I can see the car." Footsteps crashed through the underbrush. Sarah felt a surge of hope. She was going to be okay. Hurt, but alive. Marcus would probably hear about the accident, might even show up at the hospital playing the concerned husband. But that did not matter now. What mattered was that she had survived. "Jesus Christ," one of the paramedics said as he reached the car. "How long has she been down here?" "Looks like all night," another voice answered. "Call it in. We need the jaws of life." Sarah tried to speak, to let them know she was conscious, but the words would not come. The paramedic was checking her pulse, shining a light in her eyes. Professional voices discussed her condition, words like severe trauma and massive blood loss floating around her like clouds. The next few hours were a blur of sirens, hydraulic tools cutting through metal, and careful hands lifting her onto a stretcher. Sarah kept slipping in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of conversations between the rescue workers. "Husband's on his way. Touch and go. If she makes it through surgery." Surgery. The word stuck in her mind as they loaded her into the ambulance. She was hurt worse than she had thought. The concerned faces of the paramedics told her everything she needed to know about her chances. At the hospital, everything moved in fast forward. Bright lights, urgent voices, the squeak of wheels on linoleum. Sarah caught glimpses of doctors and nurses rushing around her stretcher, their faces grim and focused. Someone was cutting away her clothes. Others were hooking up IVs and monitors. Blood pressure dropping, someone called out. She's crashing, another voice said. Sarah wanted to tell them she was still there, still fighting, but her body would not cooperate. The world was getting darker around the edges, sounds becoming muffled and distant. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Marcus standing in the hallway outside the trauma room. He was wearing his expensive suit, the one he saved for important business meetings. His face was a mask of concern, but Sarah had lived with him long enough to recognize the calculation behind his eyes. Even in her fading consciousness, she wondered why he looked more relieved than worried. The surgery took 14 hours. Sarah floated in and out of awareness, sometimes hearing the doctors talking about her condition, sometimes drifting in a space between sleep and waking where nothing existed but darkness and pain. When she finally surfaced completely, the first thing she noticed was the silence. No beeping monitors, no hushed voices in the hallway, no sound of her own breathing. Sarah opened her eyes to find herself in a strange room. Not a hospital room, but what looked like a guest bedroom in someone's house. The walls were painted pale yellow, and autumn sunlight streamed through lace curtains. She was lying on a narrow bed, covered by a handmade quilt that smelled like lavender and old wood. She sat up slowly, expecting pain, but there was none. No headache, no aches in her bones, nothing. She looked down at her hands, turning them over in the light. They looked normal, but somehow different. Paler maybe, or less substantial. "You're awake," a voice said from the doorway. Sarah turned to see an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She was wearing a simple blue dress and an apron, like someone from another time. The woman smiled and stepped into the room, carrying a cup of tea on a small tray. "Where am I?" Sarah asked, surprised that her voice worked perfectly now. "You're safe," the woman said, setting the tea on a bedside table. "That's what matters right now. I'm Eleanor Walsh. I found you on the road after your accident." "The road?" Sarah was confused. "But the paramedics found me. I was in the hospital. There was surgery." Eleanor's expression grew gentle but sad. "Dear, that was 3 weeks ago. You've been unconscious for quite some time." 3 weeks. That was impossible. Sarah tried to remember what had happened after the surgery, but there was only darkness. "I need to call my sister. She'll be worried sick. You need to rest to get your strength back. There will be time for everything else later." Something in the woman's tone made Sarah uneasy. "What aren't you telling me? How did I get here? Why didn't you take me to a hospital?" Eleanor sat down in a chair beside the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to understand. Just tell me," Sarah said, fear creeping into her voice. "You died on that operating table," Eleanor said quietly. "Officially, according to every record, every person who matters, Sarah Chun died from injuries sustained in a car accident 3 weeks ago. Your funeral was last Tuesday." Sarah stared at her, the words not making sense. "That's impossible. I'm right here. I'm talking to you." "Yes, you are," Eleanor agreed. "But as far as the rest of the world knows, you're gone. Your husband collected your life insurance policy. Your sister mourned your loss. Your co-workers sent flowers to your grave." "You're lying," Sarah whispered. But even as she said it, she knew something was terribly wrong. The way the sunlight seemed to pass through her hands, the complete absence of pain despite her injuries, the strange weightless feeling that had been nagging at her since she woke up. "I know it's hard to accept," Eleanor continued. "But sometimes, when someone dies with unfinished business, with a strong enough reason to stay, they get a second chance. Not as they were before, but as something new. Something with the power to right wrongs that the living cannot touch." Sarah looked down at her hands again. They were definitely more translucent in the light, like she was made of mist and memories. "What am I?" "You're what some might call a ghost," Eleanor said. "But that word carries too much baggage. You're more than that. Your justice delayed but not denied. You're the consequence that evil men never see coming. I don't understand. Eleanor stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the yard where autumn leaves danced in the wind. I've been helping people like you for 60 years, dear. People who died before their time, before they could protect themselves or others from those who hurt them. The universe has a way of balancing the scales, even if it takes longer than we might like. People like me? Sarah asked. The murdered wife who comes back to expose her killer husband. The child who died from abuse, returning to save other children from the same fate. The victim who becomes the hunter. Eleanor turned back to face her. You have a choice to make, Sarah. You can move on to whatever comes next, find your peace. Or you can stay and finish what you started when you packed those bags and left Marcus. The mention of her husband's name sent a chill through Sarah. Marcus. He thinks I'm dead. He knows you're dead. He was there when they turned off the machines, Eleanor said grimly. He signed the papers to donate your organs. He spoke at your funeral about what a loving husband he was, how devastated he is by his loss. Sarah felt something dark and cold growing in her chest. He was relieved. At the hospital, when I was dying, he looked relieved. I imagine he was. Your life insurance policy was quite generous. And now he's free to do whatever he pleases without the inconvenience of a wife to control. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus had not just been an abusive husband. He had been waiting for her to die. Maybe he had even hoped for it. And now he was living her life insurance money, probably already moving on to his next victim. What can I do? Sarah asked. If I'm dead, if no one can see me. Eleanor smiled. And, for the first time, it was not entirely kind. Oh, my dear. There's so very much you can do. Being dead has remarkable advantages for someone seeking justice. The living never see you coming. Sarah stood up from the bed, testing her new form. She felt light, insubstantial, but also powerful in a way she had never experienced while alive. Where do I start? First, you learn what you can do, Eleanor said. How to move through the world unseen. How to influence the physical realm when necessary. Then, you watch and you learn. You discover the truth about what your husband really is, what he's done, what he plans to do. And then? Eleanor's smile grew wider. Then, my dear, it's time for Marcus to learn that some people don't stay dead when they're supposed to. And that some wives never stop protecting the innocent, even from beyond the grave. Sarah felt a sense of purpose settling over her like a shroud. She had spent the last 2 years of her life afraid, running, hiding from a man who had made her existence a nightmare. But now the balance had shifted. Now she was the one with power, the one who could move unseen and undetected. Marcus thought he was free. He thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming for him. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, and Sarah found herself smiling for the second time in weeks. This time, though, there was nothing warm about it. This time, her smile was as cold and sharp as winter wind. It was time to go home. #believed dead. She became a ghost. And it was their turn to fear. Eleanor spent the next 3 days teaching Sarah the rules of her new existence. The house where Sarah had awakened sat on the edge of a small town called Millbrook, hidden among tall pine trees and accessible only by a winding dirt road. It had been Eleanor's sanctuary for decades, a place where the recently departed could learn what they had become. The first thing you must understand, Eleanor explained as they sat in her kitchen, is that you exist between 2 worlds now. You can choose to be seen or remain invisible, but the choice requires concentration and practice. Sarah held up her hand, watching the morning light filter through her translucent fingers. How long do I have before I have to move on? That depends entirely on you, Eleanor said, pouring herself coffee from an old percolator. Sarah noticed she did not offer any to her. Apparently, the dead had no need for earthly sustenance. Some spirits finish their business in days. Others take years. The longest I ever helped took 14 years to find peace, but he had quite a lot of wrongs to right. What happened to him? He brought down a corruption ring that had been poisoning his town for decades. By the time he was finished, 12 people were in prison and hundreds of families had justice for their lost loved ones. Eleanor smiled fondly. He was very thorough. Sarah spent the morning learning to control her visibility. At first, it was exhausting. She would flicker in and out like a faulty light bulb, sometimes solid enough to pick up objects, sometimes so insubstantial that her hand passed through the kitchen table. But, gradually, she began to understand the feeling, the mental switch that controlled her presence in the physical world. Emotion makes it easier, Eleanor observed as Sarah successfully lifted and moved a coffee mug while remaining completely invisible. Strong feelings anchor you to this realm. Anger, love, determination, they all give you power here. What about fear? Sarah asked. Eleanor's expression grew serious. Fear can be useful, but it's dangerous. It can make you lose control, become too solid when you need to hide, or too insubstantial when you need to act. Master your other emotions first. The older woman packed a small bag with items she called tools of the trade, a digital camera that could capture images of the living even when operated by the dead, a voice recorder that would work regardless of Sarah's state of being, and a small notebook bound in black leather. Document everything, Eleanor advised. The truth has a way of hiding from the living, but the dead see clearly. Trust what you observe, not what others claim to be true. The drive back to Philadelphia took 4 hours, time that Sarah used to prepare herself mentally for what she might find. She had not been home in 3 weeks. Marcus would have had time to clean up any evidence of their troubled marriage, to craft his narrative of the grieving widower. As Eleanor's old Honda approached the suburban neighborhood where Sarah had lived for 5 miserable years, everything looked exactly the same. The neat lawns, the matching mailboxes, the false perfection that had always felt like a prison to her. Their house sat at the end of Maple Street, a colonial revival with blue shutters that Marcus had chosen because it projected success and stability to his business clients. Are you ready for this? Eleanor asked as they parked across the street. Sarah nodded, though she was not entirely sure it was true. Seeing her own house, knowing that Marcus was inside living his life while she was officially dead, created a strange disconnection from reality. What if he can sense me somehow? What if he knows I'm there? He won't, Eleanor assured her. The living rarely sense our presence unless we want them to. And, even then, they usually dismiss it as imagination or grief playing tricks on their minds. Sarah made herself invisible and stepped out of the car. The October air should have been cold against her skin, but she felt nothing. No temperature, no sensation of wind or weather. It was disturbing, this disconnect from the physical world that had once been so immediate and real. She approached the house slowly, studying it with new eyes. The garden that she had lovingly tended looked neglected, weeds growing between her carefully planted mums. The front porch, where she had once imagined sitting with children who never came, was littered with newspapers and takeout containers. Marcus had never been tidy when left to his own devices. The front door was locked, but that proved to be no barrier. Sarah discovered that she could simply pass through solid objects when she was in her insubstantial form. The sensation was odd, like walking through thick water that parted without resistance. Inside, the house felt like a museum dedicated to a life that had never really existed. Her photos still hung on the walls, pictures of their wedding day where Marcus looked handsome and caring, and she looked young and hopeful. But Sarah could see now what she had been too naive to recognize then. The way Marcus's smile never reached his eyes, the possessive grip he maintained on her hand in every shot. The living room was a mess. Pizza boxes and beer cans covered the coffee table, and the expensive furniture that Marcus had insisted upon was stained and damaged. It looked like he had been living like a college student rather than a grieving husband. Sarah felt a flicker of anger at the disrespect, and immediately the house lights flickered in response. She forced herself to calm down, remembering Eleanor's warnings about emotional control. This was just the beginning. She needed to be systematic, methodical. Justice required evidence, not just righteous fury. Sarah made her way upstairs to the master bedroom, the room that had been both sanctuary and battlefield during her marriage. The bed was unmade, covered with clothes and papers. But what caught her attention was the laptop open on Marcus's side of the bed, displaying what looked like a dating website. She leaned closer, her fury building as she read the profile Marcus had created. According to the screen, he was a recently widowed professional seeking companionship to help heal from the tragic loss of his beloved wife. The photo showed him in a black suit, looking appropriately somber and attractive. The description painted him as a devoted husband whose world had been shattered by sudden tragedy. "Son of a bitch," Sarah whispered, and every light bulb in the bedroom exploded simultaneously. The house plunged into darkness, and Sarah heard Marcus's voice from downstairs, thick with alcohol and confusion. "What the hell?" Heavy footsteps on the stairs. Marcus appeared in the bedroom doorway, silhouetted by the hallway light, holding his phone as a flashlight. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn to her funeral. She recognized the black tie that she had given him for Christmas 2 years ago. "Damn electrical system," he muttered, examining the shattered glass on the floor. "Probably the storm last week. Insurance better cover this." Sarah watched her husband move around the bedroom, cleaning up broken glass and cursing the inconvenience. There was no grief in his actions, no sense of loss or sadness. He handled the situation like any other household problem that needed to be solved. When Marcus bent to pick up a piece of glass near the dresser, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. He was wearing his wedding ring, but around his neck was a new piece of jewelry, a gold chain with a small charm that Sarah recognized immediately. It was her charm, the one from the bracelet her father had given her for her 16th birthday. The bracelet that should have been buried with her. Marcus straightened up, the charm catching the light from his phone. He smiled as he touched it, and Sarah realized with horror that he was wearing her jewelry like a trophy. A reminder of his victory over her, a symbol of what he had taken from her. "Perfect little Sarah," he said to himself, his voice carrying a satisfaction that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Always so trusting, right up until the end." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. There was something in his tone, something that suggested her death had been more than just a fortunate accident for him. She watched as Marcus finished cleaning up the glass, humming to himself as if he had not a care in the world. After he went back downstairs, Sarah remained in the bedroom, processing what she had witnessed. The dating profile was disturbing enough. Marcus was already looking for his next victim, while she had been dead less than a month. But the charm around his neck, combined with his casual comment about her being trusting until the end, suggested something far more sinister. She spent the next hour searching through Marcus's belongings with methodical precision. In his dresser drawer, beneath expensive shirts that she had picked out for him, Sarah found a manila envelope stuffed with documents. Insurance papers, mostly, but also what appeared to be a timeline written in Marcus's handwriting. The timeline started 3 months before her death and detailed her daily routines with obsessive precision. Her usual routes to work, the time she left and returned home, her Tuesday night book club meetings, her Thursday evening yoga classes. Marcus had been tracking her movements like a stalker, documenting patterns that could be exploited. At the bottom of the timeline, in Marcus's neat handwriting, were the words, Highway 15, rainy nights, deer crossing mile marker 67. Sarah's hands began to shake. Highway 15 was the road where she had crashed. Mile marker 67 was exactly where she remembered seeing the deer. But how could Marcus have known about the deer crossing? Unless she searched deeper in the drawer and found a receipt from a hunting supply store, dated 2 weeks before her death. The purchase list included deer scent, motion sensors, and something called deer attractant calls. Below that was a receipt from an electronics store for what looked like remote-controlled devices. The pieces were beginning to form a horrifying picture. Marcus had not just been waiting for her to die, he had been planning it. The deer that caused her accident, the precise location, the timing during a rainstorm when visibility was poor, none of it had been coincidence. Sarah felt her anger rising again, but this time she controlled it, channeling the emotion into focused determination. She photographed every document with Eleanor's camera, creating a record of Marcus's premeditation. But she needed more than circumstantial evidence. She needed proof that would convince the living. A sound from downstairs interrupted her investigation. The front door was opening, and Sarah heard Marcus talking to someone. "Thanks for coming over, Detective Morrison. I know it's late, but I really appreciate you checking on me." Sarah froze. A detective was here, in her house, talking to her husband. She made herself completely invisible and crept to the top of the stairs, listening to the conversation below. "No problem, Marcus. How are you holding up?" The detective's voice was professional but friendly, suggesting a personal relationship between the two men. Some days are better than others, Marcus replied with perfect sincerity. I keep expecting Sarah to walk through the door, you know? It's hard to accept that she's really gone. Have you given any thought to that offer I mentioned? My brother-in-law's firm is always looking for good insurance investigators. Might be good for you to get away from this place for a while, start fresh. Sarah crept down the stairs, staying in the shadows where she could observe without being detected. Detective Morrison was a thick-set man in his 50s, wearing a rumpled suit that suggested he had come here directly from work. More importantly, he was wearing a wedding ring and holding a beer that Marcus had obviously given him. This was not an official visit. This was two friends having a drink. I've been thinking about it, Marcus said, settling into his favorite recliner, the one Sarah had always hated because it faced away from her when she was trying to watch television. But it seems wrong somehow, moving on so quickly. People might talk. People will always talk, Morrison replied. But you're a young man, Marcus. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Sarah wouldn't want you to waste it grieving forever. Sarah felt sick. Detective Morrison was talking about her like she was an obstacle that Marcus needed to overcome, not a person whose death deserved investigation. Actually, Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious, there's something I wanted to ask you about. As a friend, not as a cop. Shoot. The insurance company has been asking questions about Sarah's accident. Nothing major, just routine stuff for a claim this size. But they wanted to know if there was any investigation into the circumstances. Morrison waved dismissively. Standard procedure for any death claim over $100,000. But there was nothing suspicious about your wife's accident. Rainy night, dangerous road, animal in the roadway. Happens more often than you'd think, especially this time of year. That's what I told them. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything in the official report that might hold up the payout. Report was filed weeks ago. Accidental death, case closed. Morrison took a long drink of his beer. You should have that money soon. Then, you can start thinking about your future instead of dwelling on the past. Sarah watched the exchange with growing horror. Morrison was not just failing to investigate her death. He was actively helping Marcus cover it up. Whether he was complicit in the murder or just criminally negligent, the result was the same. Marcus was going to get away with killing her. There is one more thing, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. I've been having some problems with the house. Electrical issues, mostly. Lights blowing out, circuits tripping for no reason. My neighbor thinks it might be related to the grief, you know? Like Sarah's spirit is trying to tell me something. Morrison laughed, but Sarah noticed that Marcus was watching the detective's reaction carefully. Your neighbor watches too many ghost movies, Morrison said. Old houses have electrical problems. Get an electrician out here, have him check the wiring. Probably just needs updating. You're right, of course. But it's strange how it started right after the funeral. Almost like something in the house changed. Sarah realized what Marcus was doing. He was testing Morrison, seeing if the detective might be open to supernatural explanations for strange occurrences. Marcus suspected something was wrong, even if he could not identify what it was. Marcus, listen to me, Morrison said seriously. Grief does funny things to people. Makes them see patterns where there aren't any, hear sounds that aren't there, feel presences that don't exist. It's normal, but you can't let it consume you. Maybe you should think about talking to someone, a counselor or a therapist. Maybe you're right, Marcus agreed. But Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. He was not grieving, he was planning. And if he suspected that something supernatural was happening in the house, he would take steps to protect himself. The two men talked for another hour, mostly about mundane topics, sports, work, mutual acquaintances. But Sarah noticed that Marcus kept steering the conversation back to her death, probing for any sign that Morrison might have doubts about the official story. When Morrison finally left, Marcus locked the door behind him and stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the silence of the house. Then, he walked directly to the spot where Sarah was standing. I know you're there, he said quietly. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Could he see her? Had she made some mistake, allowed herself to become visible without realizing it? I don't know how, and I don't know why, Marcus continued. But I can feel you watching me. You always were too stubborn to know when you were beaten. He reached up and touched her charm around his neck, smiling that cold smile she remembered so well from their worst fights. But here's the thing, Sarah. You're dead. I made sure of that. And dead wives don't get to come back and cause problems for their husbands. So whatever game you think you're playing, it ends now. Marcus walked to a closet near the front door and pulled out a small bag that Sarah recognized. It was her overnight bag, the one she had packed when she left him. The bag that should have been destroyed in the car accident. I kept a few souvenirs, Marcus said, dumping the contents on the floor. Her clothes, her toiletries, her jewelry, all scattered like trash. Reminders of how easy it was to get rid of you. Did you really think I would let you divorce me? Take half of everything I've worked for? Make me look like a failure? He kicked her belongings across the floor, his calm mask finally, slipping to reveal the rage beneath. You were mine, Sarah. My wife, my property, my decision to make. And when you forgot that, when you tried to leave me like I was some kind of loser you could just walk away from, you signed your own death warrant. Sarah watched in horror as Marcus pulled a small device from his pocket, a remote control with a single button. The deer call worked perfectly. Remote activated, placed right at mile marker 67, just like I planned. All I had to do was wait for you to drive that route during a storm. And you were so predictable, always taking the back roads when you were upset. He pressed the button, and Sarah heard a faint electronic sound, the same sound she remembered hearing just before she saw the deer. The sound that had drawn the animal into the road at exactly the wrong moment. The best part, Marcus continued, is that even if someone found the device, it would just look like littering. A broken toy or piece of electronic junk. No one would ever connect it to your accident. Marcus gathered up her scattered belongings and threw them back into the bag. But I'm keeping the charm. A little reminder of my first successful project. Because you won't be my last wife, Sarah. There are so many lonely women out there, so many trusting souls looking for love. And I've learned so much from you about how to do this right. Sarah felt her control slipping, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her newfound abilities. The lights in the hallway began to flicker, and Marcus looked up with interest rather than fear. There you are, he said with satisfaction. I knew you were still here somewhere. But here's what you don't understand about being dead, my dear wife. You have no power here. You're nothing but an echo, a shadow of someone who doesn't matter anymore. Marcus walked to his home office and returned with a small leather journal. I've been researching your condition. Amazing what you can find on the internet about ghosts and hauntings. Turns out, there are ways to deal with unwanted spirits. He opened the journal, revealing pages of handwritten notes about supernatural protection, exorcism rituals, and ways to banish restless souls. Marcus had been preparing for this confrontation. Salt lines around the doors and windows, he read aloud. Iron filings under the furniture. Sage burning in every room. And if all else fails, there are people who specialize in sending the dead where they belong. Professional ghostbusters, you might say. Sarah realized that Marcus was not just confessing to her murder. He was threatening her continued existence. He had killed her once, and now he was planning to destroy what remained of her. You have 24 hours, Marcus said, closing the journal. One day to move on to wherever dead wives go when they finally accept that they've lost. After that, I start implementing permanent solutions. He walked upstairs, leaving Sarah alone with the scattered remains of her former life and the terrible knowledge of what her husband really was. But instead of despair, Sarah felt something new growing inside her, a cold, focused determination that made her feel more solid and real than she had since awakening in Eleanor's house. Marcus thought he held all the cards. He thought being dead made her powerless. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Era waited until Marcus fell asleep before she began her real work. She had learned everything she needed to know from his drunken confession, but now she needed evidence that would convince the living world. Marcus had been careful, too careful for traditional police work to uncover the truth. But he had not planned for an investigation conducted by someone who could walk through walls and observe without being detected. She started with his computer, materializing just enough to operate the keyboard and mouse. Marcus's password was pathetically predictable, Winner 123. The same combination he used for everything because he believed it reflected his superiority over others. His email account revealed a digital trail that painted a disturbing picture of premeditation. 3 months before her death, Marcus had begun researching her life insurance policy, specifically the double indemnity clause that would pay twice the normal amount in case of accidental death. He had also been corresponding with a private investigator named Tommy Chun, no relation to Sarah, despite the shared surname, who specialized in what he euphemistically called domestic surveillance. The email chain with Tommy Chun was particularly damning. Marcus had hired him to track Sarah's movements, document her routines, and identify her vulnerabilities. The final email in the chain, sent 2 days before Sarah's death, included detailed maps of her usual routes home from work, noting which roads became dangerous during weather events. Target confirmed to use Highway 15 during emotional distress situations, Tommy had written. Road conditions optimal for staged accident during storm systems. Recommend deployment of wildlife attractants at mile marker 67, highest probability of success. Sarah photographed every email, every document, every piece of digital evidence she could find. But she knew that electronic records could be dismissed as forgeries or hacker manipulations. She needed something more tangible, something that would stand up in court and convince skeptical investigators. The answer came when she found Marcus's planning materials hidden in his home office safe. A safe whose combination she knew because she had watched him open it hundreds of times during their marriage. Inside, along with important documents and cash, was a detailed timeline of her murder written in Marcus's own handwriting. The timeline was chillingly methodical. It began 6 months before her death with initial planning phase, research accident statistics, insurance requirements, legal implications. It progressed through target assessment, daily routines, behavioral patterns, emotional triggers, and culminated with execution phase, weather monitoring, device placement, confirmation of target route. At the bottom of the timeline, in Marcus's neat script, was a list of future targets with 3 women's names, ages, and estimated asset values. One name was highlighted in yellow, Rebecca Martinez, a 28-year-old nurse whose online dating profile Marcus had apparently been studying. Sarah felt sick as she realized that Marcus was not just a killer. He was a serial killer in the making. Her murder had been a test run for what he planned to make his livelihood. She was the first in what could become a string of accidentally dead wives, each one making Marcus a little wealthier and a little more confident in his methods. She photographed the timeline and the target list, then searched the rest of the safe for additional evidence. What she found there exceeded her worst expectations. Marcus had been planning this career change for over a year, researching everything from forensic science to grief counseling to create the perfect cover identity. In a manila folder labeled Business Plan, Sarah discovered Marcus's detailed strategy for what he called sequential matrimonial liquidation. The plan outlined how he would meet vulnerable women through online dating, court them quickly to avoid extended background checks, marry them within 6 months, then arrange their deaths within 2 years of marriage to avoid suspicion while maximizing insurance payouts. The plan included budgets for investigative services, equipment costs, travel expenses for selecting targets in different states, and even marketing strategies for maintaining his cover as a grieving widower between marriages. Marcus had approached her murder with the same methodical planning he brought to his corporate consulting work. Sarah spent the rest of the night documenting everything she could find, building a comprehensive case file that would prove Marcus's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. But, as dawn approached, she realized that having evidence was only half the battle. She needed to get this information to someone who would believe it and act on it. Detective Morrison was clearly not an option. His conversation with Marcus had revealed him to be either complicit or willfully blind to the truth. Sarah needed to find someone else, someone who would take her evidence seriously despite its supernatural origin. The answer came to her as she remembered her sister Jenny's husband, David Park. David was a federal prosecutor who specialized in complex fraud cases, someone who dealt with criminals smart enough to think they were untouchable. More importantly, David had never liked Marcus and had often expressed concerns about Sarah's marriage. Sarah left the house as the sun was rising, making her way to Eleanor's car where the older woman waited patiently. During the drive back to Millbrook, Sarah shared everything she had discovered, showing Eleanor the photographs and explaining Marcus's larger plan. He's not just a killer, Sarah concluded. He's building a business around murdering women for profit. If we don't stop him, Rebecca Martinez is going to die in the next few months, and then someone after her, and someone after that." Eleanor listened thoughtfully, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. "This is worse than most cases I've handled," she admitted. "Usually, spirits seek justice for past crimes. You're trying to prevent future murders. Can we do it? Can we stop him before he kills again? We can try, but it will require more than just evidence. Marcus is clever, cautious, and he has allies in the police department. Even with proof of his guilt, he might find ways to avoid consequences. Then, what do you suggest?" Eleanor was quiet for several minutes as they drove through the autumn countryside. Finally, she spoke with the voice of someone who had seen too much injustice to believe in simple solutions. "Sometimes, my dear, the dead have to take justice into their own hands. The living world has rules, procedures, legal technicalities that allow evil men to escape consequences. But the dead operate by different rules." "What do you mean?" "I mean that there are ways to ensure Marcus faces justice even if the courts fail. Ways to make certain he never harms another woman, regardless of whether he ever sees the inside of a prison cell." Sarah considered this as they arrived back at Eleanor's house. The idea of taking direct action against Marcus was appealing. He had stolen her life, destroyed her future, and was planning to do the same to other women. But she was not ready to abandon hope in the justice system entirely. "I want to try the legal route first," Sarah decided. "If that fails, then we can discuss alternatives." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's wise. Justice should always be the first option, even when it's difficult to achieve." They spent the morning preparing a comprehensive package of evidence to send to David Park. Eleanor had contacts in the federal system who could ensure the evidence would reach David through unofficial channels, avoiding the local authorities who might be compromised. The package included copies of all the documents Sarah had photographed, a detailed timeline of Marcus's activities, and a carefully written summary that presented the evidence without revealing its supernatural origin. To the outside world, it would appear that an anonymous tipster had somehow gained access to Marcus's private records and was turning them over to federal authorities. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as Eleanor prepared to mail the package. "Now we wait and watch. Federal investigations move slowly, especially when they involve local law enforcement corruption. It could be weeks or months before they have enough evidence to act. And, in the meantime, Marcus might approach Rebecca Martinez. Yes, which is why you're going to keep watching him. Document his activities, gather more evidence, and, if necessary, intervene to protect his potential victims." Sarah spent the afternoon learning more advanced techniques for interacting with the physical world. Eleanor taught her how to manipulate electronic devices from a distance, how to create convincing evidence of her presence when needed, and, most importantly, how to defend herself against the supernatural countermeasures Marcus was planning to deploy. "Salt lines and iron filings are nuisances at most," Eleanor explained. "They can slow you down, make you uncomfortable, but they cannot truly harm you unless you allow them to. The key is confidence. You are not some mindless ghost to be banished by amateur rituals. You are a conscious spirit with a specific purpose. What about professional exorcists?" Eleanor's expression grew serious. "Those are more dangerous, not because they have any real power over you, but because they can convince others that you've been dealt with. If Marcus brings in someone with credentials, it might satisfy authorities that any supernatural activity has been resolved. So I need to be more careful. You need to be invisible when you want to be invisible, and undeniably present when you want to send a message. Control is everything." Sarah practiced these skills throughout the afternoon, learning to make lights flicker in specific patterns, to move objects with precision, and to create sounds that could convey meaning to the living. By evening, she felt confident in her abilities. "I'm ready to go back," she announced. Eleanor studied her carefully. "Are you certain? Once you begin actively opposing Marcus, there will be no going back to passive observation. He will know you're there, and he will fight back." "He already knows I'm there," Sarah replied, "and he's already planning to fight back. The only question is whether I'm going to let him do it on his terms or make him play by mine." They drove back to Philadelphia as darkness fell. Sarah's house looked different now that she knew the truth about what had happened there. It was not her home anymore. It was a crime scene, the place where her murder had been planned and celebrated. Marcus's car was gone from the driveway, which meant he was out somewhere, probably implementing the next phase of his plan. Sarah used the opportunity to search the house more thoroughly, looking for any evidence she might have missed during her first visit. In the garage, behind boxes of Christmas decorations that would never be used again, she found Marcus's hunting supplies, the equipment he had used to create her accident. The deer calls, motion sensors, and remote triggers were all there, along with detailed notes about their deployment and recovery. More disturbing was a new addition to his collection, what appeared to be brake line cutters, window glass etching tools, and various devices designed to create mechanical failures in vehicles. Marcus was expanding his repertoire, developing new methods for staging accidental deaths. Sarah was photographing these items when she heard Marcus's car pulling into the driveway. She quickly made herself invisible and moved to a position where she could observe without being detected. Marcus entered the house with someone. A woman's voice could be heard chatting casually about dinner plans. "The kitchen's right through here," Marcus was saying in the charming tone that Sarah remembered from their early dating days. "I hope you don't mind the mess. I'm still getting used to taking care of the place by myself." Sarah felt her blood run cold as she recognized the woman's voice from social media videos. It was Rebecca Martinez, the nurse whose name had been highlighted on Marcus's target list. "It's perfectly understandable," Rebecca was saying. "Losing your wife so suddenly, having to manage everything alone. I can't imagine how difficult that must be." Sarah watched from the kitchen doorway as Marcus gave Rebecca the same tour he had given her 5 years ago, the same carefully crafted performance designed to make women feel comfortable and special. Rebecca was laughing at his jokes, accepting his offers of wine, falling for the same act that had once fooled Sarah. "You know," Marcus said as he poured wine for both of them, "I was worried about dating again so soon. People might think it's inappropriate, that I should be grieving longer." "People can be judgmental," Rebecca agreed. "But life is too short to spend it alone. Your wife would want you to be happy, wouldn't she?" Sarah was always very generous that way. Marcus replied with perfect sincerity. "She would definitely want me to find companionship." Sarah felt rage building inside her as she watched Marcus play the grieving widower role to perfection. The lights in the kitchen began to flicker, and she had to force herself to regain control before her presence became obvious. "Is everything okay with your electricity?" Rebecca asked, noticing the fluctuations. "Old house," Marcus explained smoothly. "I've been having some issues since the funeral. Probably just stress affecting my perception, but it sometimes feels like Sarah's still here, watching over me." He said this while looking directly at the spot where Sarah was standing, his eyes cold and challenging despite the warm tone of his voice. "That's actually kind of beautiful," Rebecca said softly. "The idea that love survives death, that our departed loved ones stay close to protect us." "Yes," Marcus agreed, his smile becoming predatory. "Very close indeed." Sarah realized she was watching the beginning of Rebecca's seduction, the first step in a process that would end with another accidental death in 6 to 12 months. She could not let this continue, but she also could not reveal herself without potentially making things worse for Rebecca. She needed a more subtle approach. As Marcus and Rebecca continued their dinner, Sarah began implementing a campaign of psychological warfare. She started small, making the wine glasses vibrate slightly when Marcus reached for them, causing the lights to dim whenever he leaned too close to Rebecca, creating cold spots in the room that made Rebecca shiver and move away from Marcus. "Are you feeling a draft?" Rebecca asked, pulling her sweater tighter around herself. "Now that you mention it, yes," Marcus replied, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew exactly what was causing the disturbances. Sarah escalated gradually throughout the evening. When Marcus tried to put his arm around Rebecca on the couch, the television turned itself onto a news report about domestic violence. When he suggested they move to the bedroom to see Sarah's art collection, every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. "Okay, that's definitely not normal," Rebecca said, standing up abruptly. "Marcus, I think there's something wrong with your house." "It's just the old heating system," Marcus said, but his voice was strained. "The ducts expand and contract, creates pressure that can move doors. All the doors at once." Sarah could see that Rebecca's survival instincts were beginning to override her sympathy for the grieving widower. This was her chance to drive the point home. She materialized just enough to become a barely visible shadow in Rebecca's peripheral vision, then moved slowly across the living room, making sure Rebecca caught the movement without being able to identify what she was seeing. Rebecca gasped and grabbed Marcus's arm. "Did you see that? Something just moved across the room." "I don't see anything," Marcus said, but Sarah could hear the anger beneath his calm tone. There it is again." Rebecca pointed as Sarah allowed herself to become slightly more visible, a translucent figure in a white dress moving through the room like a classical ghost. Marcus stood up, his patience finally exhausted. "Rebecca, I think you should leave." "What?" "Marcus, there's something in your house. Something supernatural. Don't you see it?" "There's nothing there," Marcus said firmly. "You're letting your imagination run away with you." But Rebecca was already gathering her purse and jacket, her maternal instincts telling her to get away from whatever was happening in this house. "I'm sorry, Marcus. This is just too strange. Maybe we can try again some other time, when things are more settled." Marcus walked her to the door, maintaining his facade of confused concern until she was gone. Then, he slammed the door and turned to face the empty room where Sarah waited. "That was a mistake," he said quietly. "You just made yourself an enemy instead of a nuisance." Sarah materialized fully, standing in the center of the living room where there could be no doubt about her presence. "Good," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room for the first time since her death. "I want you to know exactly what you're dealing with." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that she had never seen during their marriage: genuine fear. The fear in Marcus's eyes lasted only a moment before it was replaced by calculation. Sarah watched as her husband, her murderer, studied her ghostly form with the same analytical intensity he brought to business problems. "So you can manifest physically," he said, circling her slowly as if she were a specimen to be examined. "Interesting. The research suggested that spirits needed strong emotional connections to achieve full materialization. I suppose hatred qualifies." Sarah remained motionless, letting Marcus reveal his thought process. She had learned during their marriage that his arrogance would always make him explain his plans in detail, needing to demonstrate his intellectual superiority even when it worked against his interests. "The question is," Marcus continued, "how much energy does it cost you? And how long can you maintain it? Because I've been doing quite a bit of reading about your condition, and everything I've found suggests that ghosts have limitations." He walked to his office and returned with the leather journal she had seen before, along with several new books on supernatural phenomena and psychic investigation. Marcus had been busy preparing for this confrontation. According to multiple sources, he read aloud, "Manifestation requires tremendous spiritual energy. Most ghosts can only maintain physical presence for minutes at a time, and repeated manifestations weaken them progressively." Sarah felt a chill of concern. She did not know if Marcus's research was accurate, but she could feel that maintaining her physical form required constant concentration and effort. How long could she keep this up? "There are also environmental factors to consider," Marcus went on. "Iron disrupts spiritual energy. Salt creates barriers. Certain electromagnetic frequencies can cause pain or disorientation in supernatural entities." As he spoke, Marcus was moving around the room, and Sarah realized he was implementing his countermeasures. He sprinkled salt across the doorways and windows, placed iron nails at strategic points around the room, and activated several electronic devices that filled the air with high-pitched whining sounds. Sarah immediately felt the effect. Her form began to flicker, and maintaining her visibility became exponentially more difficult. The iron created a sensation like nails on a chalkboard along her nerves, and the electronic interference made it hard to think clearly. "There we go," Marcus said with satisfaction as Sarah's image wavered. "Much better. Now we can have a proper conversation." Sarah forced herself to remain manifested despite the discomfort. She could not let Marcus see that his countermeasures were working. "You think some parlor tricks will stop me? I think that knowledge is power, my dear dead wife. And I know things about your current situation that you haven't figured out yet." Marcus opened his laptop and showed her a screen filled with research articles, forum discussions, and Academic papers about paranormal phenomena. Did you know that vengeful spirits have an expiration date? According to this study from the University of Edinburgh, ghosts typically have only a few weeks of manifestation potential before they're forced to move on to whatever comes next. Sarah tried not to show her concern, but Marcus caught the flicker of uncertainty in her expression. Your mysterious benefactor didn't mention that detail, did she? Let me guess. Elderly woman, claims to help spirits find justice, operates from a remote location where she can control the narrative. Sarah's blood ran cold. How could Marcus know about Eleanor? Eleanor Walsh, age 73, former psychiatric nurse who lost her medical license in 1987 for conducting unauthorized experiments on terminal patients. She's been running her Little Ghost Rehabilitation Center for decades, collecting spirits like some people collect stray cats. Marcus showed Sarah a police file on his computer screen. Eleanor's photograph was clearly visible, along with details of her criminal history that Sarah had never suspected. According to this, Marcus continued, Dear Eleanor has a pattern of finding traumatized spirits and convincing them to carry out vigilante justice against the living. She's been connected to at least 12 suspicious deaths over the past 30 years, all involving people who had allegedly wronged the spirits in her care. Sarah felt her carefully constructed worldview crumbling. Eleanor had seemed so kind, so genuine in her desire to help. But the evidence on Marcus's screen told a different story, a story of manipulation and murder disguised as supernatural justice. The beautiful thing about using ghosts as weapons, Marcus explained, is that they're untraceable. When a spirit kills someone, there's no physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints. Just another mysterious death that gets filed under unexplained circumstances. You're lying, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Then, explain why Eleanor never mentioned the time limit on your existence. Why she taught you to be invisible and manipulate objects, but never explained the long-term consequences of using those abilities. Why she immediately suggested violence as a solution when legal methods seemed difficult. Marcus's words were having their intended effect. Sarah could feel doubt creeping into her mind, weakening her concentration and making it even harder to maintain her physical form. Here's what really happened, Marcus continued, moving closer as Sarah's image flickered more intensely. Eleanor read about your death in the newspapers and decided you would make a perfect weapon against me. She created an elaborate fiction about your second chance and convinced you that you were some kind of supernatural avenger. Then, how do you explain this? Sarah gestured to her ghostly form. How do you explain what I can do? Drugs, Marcus said simply. Eleanor has access to experimental pharmaceuticals that can create powerful hallucinations, false memories, even apparent supernatural abilities. You never died, Sarah. You've been drugged and brainwashed into believing you're a ghost. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Could it be true? Could everything she had experienced since the accident be an elaborate hallucination? She tried to remember the details of her death, but suddenly, everything seemed uncertain, dreamlike. The car accident was real, Marcus admitted. But you survived. Eleanor found you during recovery, convinced the hospital staff that you had died, then spirited you away to her compound where she could work on you undisturbed. Sarah looked down at her hands, watching them flicker in and out of visibility. Were they really translucent, or was that just a side effect of whatever chemicals Eleanor had used on her? Think about it logically, Marcus pressed. Have you eaten anything since your supposed death? Have you felt hunger, thirst, fatigue? Or has Eleanor been providing you with special drinks and medications to help you adjust to your new state? Sarah tried to remember, but the memories seemed fuzzy. Had Eleanor been giving her something? The tea that first morning, the special water bottles during training, the herbal supplements to strengthen her spiritual essence. You're not dead, Sarah. You're a victim of a sophisticated criminal organization that uses grief and trauma to create assassins who believe they're already beyond the law. Marcus showed her more files on his computer, police reports about other supernatural deaths that had occurred near Eleanor's property, toxicology reports showing unusual chemical compounds in the victim's systems, and witness statements describing strange behavior from people who later claimed to be ghosts. Eleanor Walsh is not a helper of spirits, Marcus said definitively. She's a cult leader who specializes in creating delusional killers. And you, my dear wife, are her latest recruit. Sarah felt her reality dissolving around her. Everything she had believed about her death, her purpose, her very existence was being systematically destroyed by Marcus's evidence. But, even as doubt consumed her, part of her mind remained analytical, examining his claims for flaws. If I'm not really dead, she said slowly, then how did I get into this house? You said the doors were locked. Eleanor's people have keys. They've been watching this place, waiting for the right moment to stage your haunting. The broken windows upstairs, the missing food from the refrigerator, the electrical problems. All of it was preparation for this performance. The insurance papers in your safe, planted there by Eleanor's team. Easy enough to create fake documents when you know what you're looking for. Marcus's smile was triumphant. She did her research on me just like I did mine on her. The difference is, I didn't fall for her con game. Sarah wanted to argue, to find holes in his logic, but everything he said seemed to fit together perfectly. Too perfectly, perhaps. There's just one problem with your theory, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as her analytical mind engaged. If Eleanor has been drugging me into believing I'm dead, then how do you explain the evidence I found against you? The timeline of my murder, the hunting equipment, the target list with Rebecca's name on it. For the first time since beginning his explanation, Marcus hesitated. What evidence? The detailed plan in your safe for murdering multiple wives for their insurance money. The correspondence with Tommy Chun about staging my accident. The remote-controlled deer calls you used to make sure I crashed at exactly the right spot. Marcus's confident expression faltered slightly. You couldn't have access to those files. My safe requires a biometric scanner that only responds to my fingerprints. Unless I watched you open it hundreds of times during our marriage and memorized the backup combination you thought I never noticed, Sarah replied, feeling her confidence returning. She could see uncertainty creeping into Marcus's eyes as he realized that his elaborate deception had a fundamental flaw. She actually had discovered real evidence of his crimes. Evidence that Eleanor could not have planted because it was based on information only Sarah would know. The combination to your safe is 1-0-2-7-8-5, Sarah continued. October 27th, 1985. Your mother's birthday. You used it because you thought I would never remember her birthday after how rude she was to me at our wedding. Marcus's face went pale. That information could not have been fabricated or planted by outside agents. It was too specific, too personal. The deer call device is hidden in your garage behind the Christmas decorations, Sarah pressed on, along with brake line cutters, glass etching tools, and a detailed manual on creating accidental deaths. None of that equipment was there before I supposedly died, which means you acquired it afterward to expand your murder methods. How could you possibly know? Because I really am dead, Marcus. Because I really can walk through walls and observe without being seen. Because everything Eleanor told me about spirits seeking justice is true, and your psychological warfare campaign was just a desperate attempt to make me doubt myself. Sarah felt her form solidifying as her certainty returned. The iron nails and salt lines that had weakened her before now seemed merely irritating rather than debilitating. Marcus's electromagnetic devices created no more distress than the hum of a fluorescent light. Your research about ghost limitations might be accurate, Sarah admitted. But you made one crucial mistake in your calculations. What mistake? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since her death, it was a genuinely happy expression. You assumed I was just a vengeful spirit operating alone. But I'm not alone, Marcus. I have allies among the living. As if summoned by her words, Sarah heard the sound of cars pulling up outside. Multiple vehicles, their engines cutting off in coordinated timing that suggested official business. What did you do? Marcus demanded, rushing to the window. Through the glass, they could both see federal agents taking positions around the house. Sarah recognized David Park among them, along with several other men and women wearing FBI windbreakers and carrying official badges. I sent your confession to people who know how to use it properly, Sarah explained. The evidence package was delivered to federal prosecutors 3 days ago. They've been building a case against you ever since. That's impossible. You're not. You can't interact with. I can when I need to. especially when stopping a serial killer requires it. The front door exploded inward as federal agents executed their warrant. Marcus spun around, looking for escape routes, but agents were already entering through the back door and positioning themselves at every window. "Marcus Chun," David Park announced, striding into the living room with his weapon drawn. "You're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Chun and conspiracy to commit additional homicides." Sarah watched with satisfaction as agents swarmed around Marcus, searching his person for weapons while reading him his rights. The look of complete bewilderment on his face was almost worth everything she had endured since her death. "This is insane," Marcus protested as they handcuffed him. "You can't arrest me based on fabricated evidence from a ghost story. We're arresting you based on physical evidence found in your home office safe," David corrected. "Documents written in your own handwriting detailing the premeditated murder of your wife, along with plans to kill additional victims. You can't have accessed my safe without a warrant. We had a warrant, signed by a federal judge based on credible evidence provided by an anonymous informant." David held up several evidence bags containing Marcus's planning materials. "These match your handwriting. Your fingerprints are all over them. And the dates correspond exactly with your wife's death." As the agents led Marcus away, he looked back one final time at the spot where Sarah stood. She made sure he could see her clearly, wanted him to understand that she had won despite all his careful planning and research. "This isn't over," Marcus said as they forced him toward the door. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied, though only she could hear her own words. But even as she watched her murderer being taken into custody, Sarah realized that Marcus was partially right about one thing. Her time in this realm was limited. She could feel herself becoming less solid, less connected to the physical world. The effort of manifesting for so long, combined with the energy required to provide evidence to the authorities, had drained her spiritual reserves significantly. She had accomplished her primary objective. Marcus would face justice for her murder and would never harm another woman. But there were still loose ends to tie up, still people who deserved to know the truth about what had happened. Most importantly, she needed to confront Eleanor about the allegations Marcus had made. Whether they were true or false, Sarah deserved to know the real story behind her resurrection and the organization that had claimed to help her. As the federal agents finished securing the crime scene, and Marcus's car disappeared down the street toward federal detention, Sarah felt a familiar presence behind her. "Quite a performance," Eleanor said, materializing in the living room as if she had been there all along. Sarah turned to face the woman who had given her this second chance, studying her with new eyes colored by Marcus's accusations. "We need to talk." Eleanor stood in the middle of the living room, her silver hair catching the light streaming through the windows. But now that Sarah was looking closely, she could see things she had missed before. The way Eleanor's form seemed slightly translucent around the edges, the absence of shadow beneath her feet, the subtle shimmer that surrounded her like heat waves on summer pavement. "You're dead too," Sarah said, the realization hitting her with surprising force. Eleanor smiled sadly. "For 63 years now. Tuberculosis, if you must know. Died in the same hospital where I had worked as a nurse, watching helpless as my patients suffered from diseases I couldn't cure and abuse I couldn't stop." Sarah felt her worldview shifting once again, but this time toward understanding rather than confusion. "Marcus was wrong about you being alive, but right about everything else, wasn't he? You have been collecting spirits, using them to carry out justice against the living. Justice that the living world refuses to provide," Eleanor confirmed, settling into a chair that should not have been able to support her ghostly form. "Tell me, Sarah, how many women did the police protect from Marcus before you died? How many victims did the legal system save from men like him? That doesn't give you the right to manipulate other spirits into becoming killers, doesn't it?" Eleanor's voice carried decades of accumulated pain and frustration. "I spent 40 years watching good people suffer while evil thrived. 40 years of filing reports that went nowhere, making complaints that were ignored, begging authorities to help victims who were dismissed as hysterical or unreliable." She gestured toward the window where federal agents were still processing the crime scene. "Look at what it took to stop Marcus. Physical evidence, federal involvement, a case so airtight that even corrupt local officials couldn't ignore it. How many spirits do you think have that kind of evidence against their killers? Sarah had to admit that Eleanor had a point. Most murder victims did not have access to their killer's private documents, could not photograph evidence or record confessions. Most spirits would have no way to prove their cases to living authorities. But the others you've helped, Sarah pressed. Did they all have the same kind of evidence I had? Eleanor's expression grew distant. No. Most of them had nothing but their testimony, their memories, their absolute certainty about who had wronged them. And you know how much weight the living world places on the word of a dead person. So you taught them to take justice into their own hands. I taught them that sometimes justice requires direct action. That sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to remove the threat permanently. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her supernatural state. How many people have you helped murder, Eleanor? Define murder. Eleanor said with a hardness that Sarah had never heard from her before. Is it murder when a child molester falls down the stairs after his victim's spirit loosens a carpet? Is it murder when a domestic abuser's car brakes fail after being tampered with by his dead wife? Is it murder when a corrupt police officer has a heart attack brought on by supernatural terror? Yes, Sarah said firmly. All of that is murder. And you've been teaching spirits to commit murder for 60 years. Eleanor stood up, her form becoming more solid and imposing. And in those 60 years, how many innocent people have been saved because those murderers and abusers were stopped? How many children grew up safe because their predators were eliminated? How many women lived full lives because their killers were prevented from striking again? You don't know that. I know exactly. Eleanor interrupted, producing a thick leather ledger that she had carried with her since death. I keep meticulous records. Every spirit I've helped, every target they've eliminated, every potential victim who was saved as a result. She opened the ledger, revealing pages of handwritten entries dating back decades. Names, dates, circumstances, and, most disturbingly, detailed follow-up investigations into the results of each intervention. Marcus Chun, Eleanor read from a recent entry. Eliminated before completion of secondary target acquisition. Estimated victims prevented. 4 to 7 additional wives, based on documented business plan and timeline projections. Sarah stared at the ledger, realizing that Eleanor had been planning Marcus's death from the moment they first met. You were never going to let me try the legal route first. You were always planning to have me kill him. I was prepared for either outcome, Eleanor admitted. If the federal authorities had failed to act on your evidence, then, yes, I would have guided you toward more permanent solutions. Marcus was too dangerous to leave alive. But they didn't fail. The system worked. This time, Eleanor agreed. But, Sarah, you're an exceptional case. You had access to comprehensive evidence, connections to federal law enforcement, and a target who was arrogant enough to document his crimes in detail. Most of the spirits I help have none of those advantages. Eleanor showed Sarah other entries in her ledger, cases where